So the Boston Bruins win Game 3, 7-2. Stay spanking in this one. Now, before we jump into the game and everything, I just want to apologize for not reviewing Game 2 of the series. I got called into work. I'm on call. My apologies, life happens. Also, there's a bit of a party next door. You may hear some keg stands or something like that. So, I apologize for that as well. You can tell I'm Canadian. Now, an intro to the game before it starts. I just wanted to talk about how May 5th, 1970 was the last time a Stanley Cup game was played in St. Louis. That, of course, was the famous Bobby Orr goal that was scored to end that series. John Moore from the Boston Bruins is stepping in on defense for the injured, I believe it's Matt Grzelcyk, who was hit from behind in the numbers in the last game. His head hit the glass and looks like he might have a concussion. Now, after the Bruins won this game, they have now won 5 straight road games. And not only that, but this is a cool statistic. Check this out. They're now 7-2 away from home. And they won the game. 7-2. Yeah, that was funny. And, of course, they're now 2 wins away from a Stanley Cup. The Bruins' first line all played less than 18 minutes in this game. Isn't that surprising? Yeah, they're going to be well rested for the next one. Now, let's jump right into the action here. Almost right off the top, it's Sammy Blake. He just lays out backs. And, and this is typical St. Louis. They're energized. They really come at you in the first 5 minutes. And that sort of happened. Now, they even got an early power play from a DeBrusk kneeing on a Blue player. Can't remember who it was. They had some good opportunities, but the Bruins killed it off. The Blues at that point are now 0-6 in the series on the power play. Rask was really sharp early on. Binnington was playing the puck a lot behind the net and was really helping with Blues breakouts, but that didn't last too much longer. Now, the Bruins' top line was getting a lot of really good looks. I want to say 8 minutes into the game. But St. Louis was also getting sort of chances in transition. Bergeron's line, as I just said, was looking really dangerous, especially at against the Shen line, who Berube was purposely matching up against them. Of course, the Bruins' perfection line is a bit maligned during this series because they haven't played that well. So, yeah, this one they really break out. Boston Bruins D at this point is also really pinching a lot, and it starts to cause a lot of problems for the Blues D. Then the horrible stuff starts happening for Blues fans as the Bruins get their first power play of the game. I believe that's about around 10 minutes in. Perron gets an interference, call for interference. Of course, Boston scores on it because that's what they do. That's the third power play in the series. They're up 1-0. Patrice Bergeron gets his 9th of the playoffs, assisted by Krug and DeBrusk. Now, this one is a deflection. It's hard to blame Binnington on this one. After that, there's some 4-on-4 play. It's very nondescript and kind of boring, really. Both teams were playing it really safe, and it was a sort of a defensive showdown. But then after that's done, Boston goes up 2-0. Sort of a 3-on-2 where sort of a fake shot is taken by Johansson. And he passes it to Coyle, who just puts it in the net. And Binnington just barely, almost gets a piece of his glove on it, but he really took to that fake. And that's why he didn't make it to the other side of the net in time to save it. So there we go. Now, in the last, what do I have written here? In the last 8 minutes, St. Louis have basically, of the first period, are basically sort of like one and done, in the offensive zone. They really aren't getting any extended looks at all. Boston then goes up 3-0, a goal by Sean Curley, his 4th of the playoffs. That's the fourth line, also, by the way, assisted by Nordstrom. And this is a really hard one because this is like with 8 or 10 seconds left in the first period. It goes through the legs of Binnington. This wasn't good, but it's also shot between the legs. It just kind of really surprised even the Bruins players. And Binnington just didn't really. I don't think he saw it at all. But then Craig Berube, the coach of St. Louis Blues, reviews it for an offside challenge, but it fails, and St. Louis gets a bench minor. So not only does Bruins now go up 3-0, but St. Louis now has gets a penalty with like 8-10 seconds left in the first period, and the fans are just stunned. It's just dead quiet. It's like a funeral in there. And then we go before we get to the first intermission in Don Cherry there, because I was watching Sportsnet, the shots in that first period were 12-8 for Boston. Now, Don Cherry and Ron McLean talk about a few things. Talk about how Rask really held down the fort there in the first 5 or so minutes for Boston. How Boston keeps on using that no-look pass, which was used on the second goal, Boston Bruins goal, which I just told you about. How they're using that really well. How Chara has been paying special attention to Tarasenko, who was on like an 8-game point streak, I want to say, going into the game. And then they play, Cherry plays, he introduces this video he's about to play. Basically, it's a homage to Bobby Orr. And the thing was sort of put together. Some of it was by one of his sons, and it's basically like I want to say it's like 3 or 4 minutes long, something like that. And so it's not just the Stanley Cup game against the Blues, but it's Bobby Orr's career really, and it goes to the whole thing goes to that song. On the soundtrack, Simply the Best. I don't know. Simply the Best, better than all the rest. There's a sample of my awful singing. And then after the homage finishes, they show us how there's this picture hanging above a doorway of Bobby Orr kissing. Is it kissing the cup or is he drinking from the cup? I can't remember. But the Boston Bruins trainer had put this picture up in the visitors' locker room. Was it just before the first or second game of the series? Boston. I thought that was pretty funny. Now, so let's get to the second period. Now, the Bruins start with a power play, right? Because the only 8 or 10 seconds was eaten up off the first period, and guess what? They score again, 4-0. Another quick power play goal. This was not soon after the period started. Pasternak was just left all alone in front of the net, and he just took his time and he backhanded it in. That's his 8th of the playoffs on the power play, of course, assisted by Torrey Krug and Patrice Bergeron. Now, we're almost 10 minutes into the second period now, and Boston just continues dominating the game, really, with the occasional, one-and-done opportunity from St. Louis. They go to commercial, and they come back, and as soon as they do, they show us a little clip of what... of how, how both goalies, usually go to their bench to get some water or whatever, refill the water bottle during the breaks. And they show Binnington bumping Rask. Was it on the way back or on the way there? So this is a theme that continues through the rest of the game, trying to get Rask off his game, that is. And we'll get to more of that. Now, St. Louis gets a power play. McAvoy takes a penalty for high sticking. And then shortly after the power play starts, Maroon and Chara sort of get into it, and they both get penalties for unsportsmanlike conduct. Boston, of course, kills that St. Louis power play. And St. Louis got in Boston's zone, but they couldn't get anything done. They didn't look dangerous at all. But then after the power play, St. Louis scores. They go up 4-1. This is like 10 minutes in, and after some sustained pressure in the O-zone, which is probably the last time this happened was the first maybe 5 minutes in the game, The Bruins did look fatigued on this too, because obviously it was a bit hard for players to change in the second because they have to skate further. That was part of it. A Blues player had rolled off a check from Chara and put it to Barbashev, who was high in the slot, and he just put it in. That was Sanford who took the check, Zach Sanford, and passed it to Barbashev. And that was also assisted by Steen. That's Barbashev's third goal of the playoffs, by the way. And that is also, that's also St. Louis's fourth line. Scoring, it's the fourth line in this series for both teams are stealing the show. Now, Boston then gets another power play. Just, you're crying for St. Louis. You have to feel bad for St. Louis right now because it's never a good thing to take a penalty against this team. Now, Peryanko gets one for a high stick on Marchand. And you know how tall Peryanko is and how short Marchand is. So all Marchand has to do is stand near the guy and he'll get a stick in the face, really. Boston, of course, scores on that power play. They go up 5-1. And this is kind of a bad goal. I do have to give Binnington a bit of a rough time for this one. Although it was slightly deflected by his own defenseman. This was like around 7:48 left in the second period. And that is a goal by Torrey Krug. His second of the playoffs. So that's assisted by Marchand and Patrice Bergeron. And this is when Binnington gets pulled. Allen comes in. And then, what do I have here? I'm trying to read my own writing. The Boston's power play is just super lethal. It's just amazing. Again, you can just put up a goal on the scoreboard. Why waste anyone's time even sending players out there? After this, Edmondson and Backus started to get into it again, and there was a lot of talking back and forth. Edmondson, I believe, is still probably upset with his former teammate, Backus, who kind of really sold a cross-checking penalty he got, Edmondson got back in game one. Also, a little interesting note here, although Binnington gets pulled after all three times that Binnington has had bad games during the playoffs, he's bounced back really well for the next one. So we'll see what happens in game four. Moving on though, in the second period, still some notes here. Things started to get a little sticky between both these teams. Obviously, Perron knocks over Rask purposely, just shoves him to the ground when the referees are kind of not looking. He doesn't get a penalty for it. Then Rask kind of gets back up on his feet and skates right up to Perron, and then Perron just obliges him, and the two are just like face to face, butting helmet to face mask there. It was made for a really good picture. I hope somebody got one of that. Maybe I'll try and find a thumbnail for my video. Now, during the second intermission, this is when the panel comes out, with Kyprios and Rudy and Elliot Friedman and McLean. Anyways, they talked about how Bergeron and Marchand weren't just great doing everything, and they've bounced back in this game, but how they were really good on the penalty kill as well. How Binnington, Kelly Rudy got a little upset with how Binnington didn't come back after he was pulled in the second, and how he called that bad sportsmanship. But he said, unless he was ill, he doesn't know. But, it was kind of a bad look for him. I mean, when he came off the bench, he kind of skated right by the Bruins bench, almost to say, middle, kind of, he didn't give them a middle finger, but it seemed like a kind of a little show of, I'll be back. And when he skates by his bench, everyone's patting him down, giving him fist bumps, all that kind of thing. He fist bumps Allen. Allen goes in. So there didn't seem to be anything wrong with his behavior before that. So I don't know why he didn't come back. Hopefully, for St. Louis's sake, he's not injured. But in any case, they also the panel also talked about how the Bruins were great at taking the puck away. How they're fantastic at, and they showed a lot of video examples of this, stick-on-stick checking, taking their sticks away, lifting their sticks, all that kind of thing. Moving to the third period now, there's a scrum in front of Rask, and there's some 4-on-4 play now with about just a minute into the game. Boston then gets a penalty. Carlo on Riley for tripping. Of course, Boston kills that because that's what they do. And now they've killed 19 straight penalties. That's an interesting little stat there for them, for the Bruins. And St. Louis still has no power play goals in the series up to this point. Anyways, now Boston then gets another that gets killed, as I mentioned, but the Boston then gets another St. Louis gets another power play. Sorry, I'm tripping over myself here. Chara gets with a stick to the head or a cross check. I think it was on Schmaltz. And St. Louis scores on the power play. Can you believe it? It's unbelievable. Colton Paryenko gets the second of the playoffs, assisted by Ryan O'Reilly and Tyler Bozak. Shocking. They finally get that power play goal. And then the Bruins, shortly after that, get another penalty. And this was, they weren't far after each other. It was for a delay of the game. The puck went over the glass. Those penalties were like not even a minute apart, from that Chara penalty to the DeBrusque penalty for the delay of game. So, and St. Louis is like, this could. I remember thinking this could get interesting. St. Louis has come back in games before, but they just haven't really showed much in this game. They did get that power play goal finally. You thought maybe that's an omen, but no. Boston kills it. St. Louis is just telegraphing too many of their passes. It's even as a fan, the Bruins are picking them off easily. You're like, dude, everyone knows where you're passing that puck, even the guy in the nosebleeds. Did I don't know if I mentioned, I digress a bit here. The shots in the second were 10-8 for St. Louis. Now, continuing on with the third here. It was 10 minutes into the third. Allen has only faced a one shot on net. Then the commentators, there's a bit of a break in the game, the commercial break, and they say there's a severe thunderstorm. Warnings that have basically cleared the watch party outside the St. Louis arena. There's been a lot of bad weather there in St. Louis over the past couple of playoff series, hasn't there? So, for the fans sitting out there, it's not the worst thing that could happen considering how poorly the game went for them. But, now back to the game. What do I have written down here? The perfection line is just dominating on the power play, on the penalty kill, and on 5-on-5. And you think they're on the ice for a lot of the game. It feels like it, but they're not. I think I mentioned some of the... before I started doing this video, I said all three of them got less than 18 minutes of play, which is didn't feel like that at all. Now, St. Louis pulls Allen with just under 4 or so minutes left in the game, and I have another note here about their puck handling is just their passes, their timing. Their timing is awful. It's of course, Boston scores with the empty net to go up 6-2. Noel, I can never pronounce his name wrong. Pronounce the name wrong. Acciari, I think that's how you say it. Noel Acciari. He gets a second of the playoffs. Fourth line goal right there again, assisted by Nordstrom and Charlie Coyle. And then shortly after, Bruins get a power play. This is from, I think it's a slashing on Alex Pietrangelo, the Blues captain. Boston, of course, scores, makes it 7-2. And this is no surprise, but a no-look pass from Torrey Krug to Johansson, who one-times it. He's ready for it. It's like they've done, this is a play they've practiced many times. He gets his fourth of the playoffs, and that's also assisted by Tony Clifton. Not Tony Clifton, Connor Clifton. And the shots in the third period were 11-4 for St. Louis, and they still couldn't do anything. Rask had a pretty decent game. Now, total shots were 29-24 for St. Louis. Let's talk about the goalies. Rask saves 27-29 with a .931 save percentage. Binnington, who got pulled, saved 14 of 19 with a .733 .37 save percentage. Now, I'm not going to put this total blame on him because only maybe one of those goals, one of those 5 goals that went on to him was poor, I have to say. The other, it's a bit of mix of Boston just playing really well and St. Louis not playing well defensively. Now, let's talk about team stats. So the faceoffs were 30-24 for the Bruins in this one. Bergeron was back on his game in that faceoff circle. The penalty minutes were 16 for Bruins, 12 for St. Louis. So St. Louis had some chances, you know. They just couldn't cash in for most of the night. It was just incredible. And they really have to fix their PK. The giveaways were 5-4 for the Blues in this. The takeaways were dead even at 11 apiece. The block shots were 19-7 for the Bruins. I think maybe that's part of the reason, huh? Instead, in St. Louis, 2 or 3 of those plays, there were deflections because a defenseman standing up straight in front of the shot with a stick. Typical, you know, I can see Don Cherry putting on a rant about this, like, what are you doing? Go down and block the shot or get out of the way because you're screening the goalie. Don't play a tree. He could, you know, he has to look around you. So yeah, that was a thing, and that showed up in the stats sheet here. The power play, of course, Boston was 4 for 4, unbelievable. Blues were 1 for 5, and I think that's it. And that's all. This video is long enough. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions on this game. And what do you think is going to happen in the next one? Is Binnington going to bounce back? Is the Boston Bruins power play going to continue to just kill St. Louis? They just got to stop taking penalties, really. That's the only defense against it. And are they going to get under Rask's skin? Because there's definitely some was an underlying theme in this one. If you like this video, smash that subscribe button if you haven't already. And hey, if you happen to have any Hockey Geek friends, please don't feel shy about sharing. Thanks again, and I'll see you soon.